Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. In this section we're going to start to look at connecting to external data from an Excel workbook. And we're going to start first of all by looking at connecting to data on other worksheets in the same workbook, and then at connecting to other workbooks, both open and closed workbooks. Now, in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to use a very simple example. I've got my sales data for the insurance company branches, and I'm just going to do a comparison between the figures for Orlando and the figures for Miami, just for 1 year. Now, one thing you'll already be aware of, I'm sure, is that if I were to say go to the Orlando figures and copy those, and then if I go to this tab that says branch comparison and do a paste, what I get with a regular paste is that I just get the values that I've copied appear there. Now let me go back again. I don't really need to do this copy again, but just to demonstrate as I'm doing it from the beginning, copy again. If I go back to branch comparison and effectively look as though I'm going to repeat that, but instead of doing a paste, I choose a different paste option. So let's go into paste special and let's go down to that one, paste link. When I click on paste link, what I get in each of those cells is a reference to a cell on the other worksheet. So the reference has the structure of the name of the sheet is between single quotes, then there's an exclamation mark, I normally say bang, and then C3 is a relative reference to the cell. So if I click at the other cells, of course, I get the equivalent links in those cells. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with that and the advantages and disadvantages of those two basic approaches. If you paste links, then clearly if I make an update on the Orlando page, it will be reflected in the page where I've pasted as a link rather than a value. So let's take that 544 value there. If I go to the Orlando page, click on the 544 and make it 5440. If I go back to that page, of course it's updated. And of course if I'd pasted the values, then that wouldn't be the case. Now, for the purposes of what we're doing here, I'm ignoring things like pasting, formatting, etc. I'm only concerned with the values themselves. Now, as you saw there, when we were actually establishing those links, I looked at the Orlando sheet and did something there, did a copy, and then back to that branch comparison sheet and did a paste or a paste links. And in Excel 2013 there are a couple of new or updated features that can really help with doing this sort of thing. The first of them, which I think is really useful, is actually quite difficult for me to demonstrate because of how I have to record this course, but I'm going to take you through it, and if you do it on your installation I'm sure it'll be fine. One of the main problems with the way I have to record this is that I can't actually record the full screen, or you'd get a load of stuff that would be distracting and wouldn't help you at all. So one or two aspects what we're going to do now, it does actually go into full screen, but I hope it won't affect my ability to explain to you how to do this. What we're going to do is we're going to get to a situation where we have two windows visible at once, in fact side by side, and that'll show you a really neat way of being able to establish links between the sheets in a workbook and actually see what you're doing at the same time. So here we go. First of all, I've got my workbook open. I'm doing a branch comparison between Orlando and Miami. I have many other tabs from many other branch offices. They're the only two I'm interested in, although that doesn't affect what we're going to do now. So first of all, go to the View tab and in the Window group, click on New Window. Note the description there with the screen tip. Open a second window for your document so you can work in different places at the same time. Okay, so there's my second window that's open. You can see that it's a second window on the same workbook. If you look right up at the top at the name of the workbook in this case, note there's a little :2 at the end, which just tells you that you've got a second window open. Now back to the View menu again and click on Arrange All. You get this little dialog where you can decide how you want these views arranged. Now, I should point out that you're not limited to two of these. You could have many of these windows. On such a small display as the one I'm using, getting beyond 2 actually becomes a bit difficult. But I'm going to have them arranged vertically, so the two windows I'm going to say vertical, and I'm going to click on OK. Now I hope that on your display this looks a little bit better than it does on mine. As I say, mine is constrained by some technical issues here, but basically in principle what you'll finish up with is two windows side by side like that. Both of them are looking at the same workbook, and initially both of them should have the same worksheet open. But note they are two completely separate windows. Each of them has its own ribbon, for example. So we can actually work on them independently. So let's suppose that I wanted to do the same thing for the Miami branch that I just did for the Orlando branch. If I go to the right hand window there and just step through and go to the Miami worksheet, I can literally copy and then just flick over to the other one and paste, and I can see exactly what I'm doing all of the time. Now one thing to bear in mind with this is that whenever you want to return to having a single window, all you need to do is to close one of the windows that's currently open. So you only need to click the close in the top right hand corner. And another very important thing to realize about this, and something that takes people a little bit of time to get used to, as this is a new feature, is that you're not actually looking at two instances of the same workbook. It's almost like just having two views of a workbook, maybe looking at the workbook with two different cameras. But if I went into one of the cells here, say C4, that says 425, and I change that to 525, as I type in the right hand window, watch what happens in the left hand window. As I type, the change is being made there as well. Now to set up these links, there are a couple of very useful ways you can go about it that you may not be aware of. One of them is, let's suppose that I want to paste link the Miami figures onto this branch comparison sheet. If I select the figures that I want, if I right click on the border there, I can actually drag that across into position on the branch comparison sheet, and then when I release the right hand mouse button, one of the options I see is link here, and on that basis, if I click on link here, what I've actually got, let me just flick in here, is a complete set of links to the Miami sheet. So using the right drag menu is a pretty good way of doing that, but there's another new way of doing it as well, which I think suits some people. I've completely cleared that area on the branch comparison sheet on the left, and I'm going to start again, select the data for Miami, Control C to copy them, and then back onto the left hand window, beginning of the area, and all I'm going to do is a straightforward paste, Control V. Now you may think, well, all you're going to get is the values, which is true, but you also get below that area where I've just pasted a little menu, a little paste options menu. It's just sort of fairly indistinct, but you should be able to see it there okay. You can either click on that, or just by pressing the Control key on the keyboard, it opens the little menu up. And then one of the options down there is the paste link option, but of course you have all of the other options as well. So apart from paste link, you have linked picture, and then you have the various values, formatting options, and so on. So if you just do a straightforward Control V that normally just pastes values, you can use that little paste options menu there to make a more specific paste depending on the circumstances that you're in. Okay, so that's pretty much covered what we need between worksheets in the same workbook. Let's now actually create some links between workbooks. So I'm going to close one of these windows. So now we're working on two separate workbooks. We have a branch comparison workbook which has the comparison sheet and the Orlando data in it. And then we have a separate workbook with the Miami data in it. So first of all, let's take the Orlando data, just put the headings there as well, copy. Back to the comparison sheet, select there, and I'm going to do paste links. There we are. And as you can see, if I click in one of the cells, I can see the links to the Orlando sheet. Now let's go to the Miami workbook and copy the data from there. So I'm back at the Miami book now, so let me just copy the exact equivalent data for Miami. Control C as normal, that's now on the clipboard. Now back into the comparison sheet, I'm just going to paste it right next to the other data. So again, I'm going to go for paste links, and there we are. Now notice that if I click in one of these cells, I get a full reference to the particular cell on the Miami sheet, and of course this reference includes the workbook name. So instead of just a worksheet between single quotes, we have the workbook in square brackets. So Miami1.xlsx in brackets, that's the workbook name. Then Miami, FL, which is the branch name and the worksheet name. And then we have a bang and then C3. Notice also that when I did this paste links, I didn't paste the formatting in, which of course I could have done if I'd wanted to. One thing I should point out about the workbook names and indeed the worksheet names in those kinds of links is that those single quotes around, in this case, the workbook name and the worksheet name are there because there are spaces in the names. If there are no spaces in the names, then Excel won't put those single quotes in. Now, as you've already seen, where we're working within one workbook, if I were to change a figure for Orlando, so for instance if I were to change that 544 to 534 and then go back to the branch comparison sheet, of course the same changes happen there. But what happens if, say, the branch comparison sheet was closed and I made a change in the Miami sheet? Let's just see what happens. So I'm going to close the branch comparison sheet and save changes. And I'm actually going to close and save the changes to the Miami sheet as well, and then I'll reopen it. So let's do a close. So I'm just going to change this last figure down here for inquiries. December 12, 356 should be 346. So I'm going to tick that, and then I'm going to close this sheet again, having made a change. Now the first thing that happens is that you get that familiar security warning that I'm sure you will have seen before. And of course you're dealing with another workbook that is your own workbook, so I'm assuming that you trust it. This only happens once. If you click on Enable Content, what will actually happen here is that the document that it's linking to becomes a trusted document. So if I click on Enable Content, and note, you may just have seen there that when I did that, that the 356 became 346 here, so it automatically updated that. Okay, so having done that update, I'm now going to close the comparison workbook again and then reopen it yet again. Now the next time that I do this, I don't get that same message, that same security warning. Excel knows that I've already dealt with this one, but it does give me the option of doing an update or not doing an update. Now I'll come back to that in just a moment, but generally speaking, if you want to make any updates, you just click on Update and away you go. I mentioned just now that I'd come back to that update question. When you have a workbook like this one, which is linking to other workbooks, quite often it will be some kind of summary workbook that you're working on, and you may want to send this to somebody else, and of course based on what you've seen just now, if that person tried to open this workbook, they'd get those update and don't update messages, and that person may not even have access to the Miami workbook. In fact, you may have consciously decided to make a comparison book so that they don't see some of the detail in the separate Miami workbook. Well, if you go to the Data tab, there's a group on the Data tab, Connections. One of the options there is Edit Links. If you bring up that little dialog, you can see a list of the links. You've got a link to Miami1.xlsx, worksheet, etc. Down at the bottom there's a little button, Startup Prompt. And what you can do is to suppress any message about updating links. If you click on that, anybody opening this workbook without access to Miami, they won't even be prompted, so they won't run into a problem and say, well, what's it talking about updating links? Now if you do that, you might do that on a temporary basis to supply this particular workbook to somebody else. Don't forget to switch it back on again for you if indeed you want it switched back on. So when it comes to dealing with connecting to other worksheets within the same workbook or to different workbooks, just a couple of other things to be aware of. One of them is there is absolutely no reason that you shouldn't directly type in these kinds of link. You don't have to do it in the way that I've said. If you know the name of the workbook, you know the name of the worksheet, you can literally type it in here as a formula. And if you look at this particular example here, note how a drive and a folder have been specified here. Be aware that when you move workbooks around, you can often run into trouble with folders and so on. If in this case you are always going to have the branch comparison workbook and the Miami workbook in the same folder, it will probably be a better idea not to include a folder and drive name in the link here. So that's it on connecting to workbooks. In the next section we're going to look at connecting to Access data, so please join me for that.